Welcome to part 2 of the Guide to Microsoft Excel Functions brought to you by ExcelLearningZone.com. If you have not watched part 1 of this guide yet, visit my website at ExcelLearningZone.com and you'll find it free online. The lookup functions allow you to look up one value based on another value. Now, my personal favorite lookup function is VLOOKUP. It stands for vertical lookup. It's closely related to HLOOKUP or horizontal lookup. There are also other lookup functions: lookup, match, and index. One example for VLOOKUP is to look up letter grades for your students. For example, Jack has an 85. I want to figure out which letter grade he gets. Here's my subtable right down here. 65 is an F, 70 is a C, and so on. And make sure these are sorted ascending by grade. Now, using VLOOKUP, I can say equals VLOOKUP, open parentheses, lookup value is 85 in this case, comma, table array is where is my subtable? Well, it's right here, and don't include the header, just the data. Also, make sure your subtable is sorted ascending by letter grade, comma, col index num is which column of this subtable do you want to return, column 1 or column 2. In this case, column 2 is where my letter grade is. Close parentheses and press enter, and I can see Jack's 85 gives him a B. Now, if you autofill this down, you'll notice that it doesn't work. And that's because we have to make sure to use absolute references in our formulas. Right here, this table has to be an absolute reference. $E, $6, $F, $9. And I covered the differences between absolute and relative references in my other lessons. Now, however, when I autofill this down, notice that the references aren't changed to the table. That's what absolute references do. Now, this kind of a VLOOKUP will return the value from your table that is less than or equal to the value you're looking up. For example, 85 is not found in our subtable, so it returns the value for 80, which is less than or equal to the value we're looking up. There is an option to return an exact match only. For example, here we have customers, the country they're from, and we want to return their shipping rate. So here I can say equals VLOOKUP, open parentheses, lookup value is right here, B2, comma, where's my table array? Right down here. Now, here's a shortcut trick. Hit F4 at this point, and it automatically makes your cell range absolute. So you don't have to go in and add those $signs manually. Comma, which column do you want to return? Column 2, comma, and then range lookup is the option. True, the approximate match, is what we just did a minute ago. False means an exact match. I want an exact match. In other words, the value has to exist in that table. Close my parentheses and press enter. And now when I autofill down, you'll see the exact match is working. Canada is $7, Mexico $8, and so on. So that's the VLOOKUP function, which I find to be the most useful of the lookup functions. There's also HLOOKUP, which works exactly the same, but in a horizontal table instead of a vertical lookup table. Lookup returns a value from a one-row or one-column range. Match and index can be used to return either the value or the position of a specific cell. Next, we have the math and statistics functions. SUMIF, COUNTIF, and AVERAGEIF are useful for taking the sum, count, or average of a group of cells if they meet certain criteria. Here's a simple example. Let's say I have the customer, the country they're from, and their order total. Down here, I want to summarize the totals for each country. I can use SUMIF to do that. Equals SUMIF, open parentheses, what is the range that contains your criteria? Well, in this case, it's the country. That's what I'm checking. Press F4 to make the values absolute, comma, what's my criteria? Well, I want to check for the country name itself, which I conveniently placed right here, comma, the sum range is the location of the values that you're adding up, right here. Again, press F4 to make the range absolute, close parentheses, and press enter. 94 looks correct. 64 plus 20 plus 10. And if I autofill this down, there's Canada and Mexico. The average if and count if functions work exactly the same. Newly added to Excel are the sum ifs, count ifs, and average ifs functions. And these work the same as sum, count if, and average if. However, they allow multiple criteria. Using the previous example, if we have country, total, and whether or not that order is paid, true or false, we can use the sum ifs function to only add up the orders that are paid for. Equals sum ifs with an S on it, open parentheses. With sum ifs, first we give it the sum range, which is the values that you want to add up. Hit F4 to make it absolute, comma. Criteria range 1 is the first range of criteria. So right here are our criteria. Again, F4, comma. What is the criteria? Well, it's the country right there, comma. Then we have criteria range 2, criteria range 3, and so on. So what's my next criteria? Well, the value has to be paid for. So select this range, make it absolute again, F4, comma, and the value should be true. Close parentheses, and there we have it. USA has a total of $10 in paid orders. And that looks right, because this order and this order are not paid for. If I autofill it down, you can see Canada has 24, and Mexico has 12, but it's false. Next, we have a whole bunch of functions designed to round numbers. Here are round, round up, and round down. With the normal round function, anything that is 0.5 or higher rounds up to the next integer. Otherwise, it rounds down to the previous integer. Round up will automatically round the value up, and it works on the greatest absolute value. So for example, negative values are rounded up to negative 15 because it has a greater absolute value. It's further away from 0. Whereas round down rounds down to the number with the lower absolute value. The mround function rounds a value to the nearest desired multiple. For example, here I specified mround the value, comma 5, to the nearest multiple of 5. 4 goes to 5, 6 also gets rounded to 5, 9 gets rounded to 10, and so on. You can use the ceiling and floor functions to round up or down accordingly to the desired multiple. For example, ceiling rounds up to the next multiple of 5. Floor will round down to the previous multiple of 5. So 14, for example, is ceilinged up to 15, but floored down to 10. The int, or integer, and trunc, or truncate functions work very similarly to round. Int rounds a number down to the nearest integer. It always rounds down. So int negative 14.1, for example, rounds to negative 15. And a lot of these rounding functions really have to do with the way you want to handle negative numbers. They all work slightly differently. Trunc, for example, just truncates the number at the decimal point. It chops off anything after the decimal and returns the integer portion. Next, we have median and mode. Median returns the middle value from a range of values. So if you give it a whole big long list of values, it'll tell you which one's right in the middle. And mode returns the most common item from a range of values. We have power and square root. Power returns a base number raised to a power. So if you want 10 to the third power, you can type that in. Square root returns the square root of any number. Quotient and modulus have to deal with integer division. The quotient is the integer portion of a division. So if I say 10 divided by 3, the quotient is 3. Whereas the modulus is 1. It's the remainder, what's left over after you perform an integer division. I hope you've enjoyed ExcelLearningZone.com's Guide to Excel Functions. Now, I've only scratched the surface on how to use these functions in this lesson. If you'd like to learn more, visit my website at ExcelLearningZone.com. I go into much more detail on each of these functions, plus I cover most of the hundreds of additional functions that are available in Microsoft Excel.